right. Good morning, everybody, and I appreciate everybody being here. My name is Kevin Acklin. I'm the Chief of Staff to Mayor Peduto. I'm also the Chairman of the Urban Redevelopment Authority. And this is really a great opportunity for our city. If you look at where we've come from, and yesterday was the service for Mayor Masloff, and her picture hung on the wall there. It's now down and lying in state in the first floor of the city county building. And she's somebody who, when she was mayor, at a time when, as our mayor currently says, Pittsburgh was on its knees. When I was a kid, like many of you, we were a steel-based economy. We lost a whole generation of Pittsburghers, but we bounced back. And we had the leadership in Mayor Masloff to really oversee that process, to transform ourselves from a manufacturing-based economy to a nonprofit and intellectual-based economy is what we've become with banking, and all the great things that we're now being able to take advantage of was due to the leadership. So I'd be remiss to start today in a discussion on resilience without talking about maybe perhaps one of the most resilient mayors we've ever had, who grew up poor in the Hill District and really left a legacy for us to build on. Today is a kickoff from the mayor's office, and with all of you presidents, representatives from government and the business community, the foundation community, and nonprofits in the city, to kick off our application process for the Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities program. And let's be clear, this is a global competition. We are competing against other cities on the planet. But like Pittsburghers, we welcome that competition, and we think we have something to offer. In typically how we do things under Mayor Peduto, we don't like to dictate. We like to round table or oval table here in the mayor's conference room. So this will be a collaborative process. We want to take the input of not only our partners with the county and state officials on putting forth this application, but those of you in the community, because we do view you as stakeholders. We don't like to do business here. We like to lead, but we like to lead with folks and share a seat at the table to make sure that the plan we put in place is not only the best that the city has to offer, but also one that we can all work on and put together. And when you think about being resilient, I think about a month ago or 2 months ago, Pittsburgh was named, I think, the fifth most resilient city in the world. That was a talking point that I had used in different things when I was out there, until one time, it might have been you, said that, well, Denver was number 4. So, did you say that at a meeting? Yeah, thanks, Grant. This is the staff we have here. But in any event, just a tremendous number of things that are going on outside of City Hall in our city. And it's our job to really pull that all together, put it on paper with this application, and show the Rockefeller Foundation that we deserve this award. And really today is about starting to develop a thoughtful plan, an intentional strategy, a proactive approach to how we can show what we are doing here in this city is something worthy of the investment of the Rockefeller Foundation. And so before I turn it over to Grant, who is our sustainability manager in the mayor's office, I just want to thank all of you. It's an honor to walk into these doors every day. I got here at about 5:30 this morning. There are a number of issues that are on our plate. And a lot of times in city government, you play defense, in the sports analogy. Things are thrown at you, you don't know what you're walking into, but this is our chance to come together and play offense and really define a relationship to bring somebody on board here with the support of the Rockefeller Foundation. And you'll have our full support within the mayor's office to make sure that your voice is heard, and that if we are successful in getting this award, that we'll continue to work together to build a more resilient city. And that's what we're all about. The final thought is, again, bringing it back to Mayor Masloff and all the other mayors that were there and their staff. You have a limited time that you're in this office, and that's something that we walk in here every day. There's an awesome power to be here in a mayor's office, and I think if you've interacted with those of us who are here, we don't take that for granted. And so this is one example of something that we want to leave as a legacy. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Grant, and I appreciate everyone being here and look forward to working with you. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kevin. We appreciate your opening remarks, and again, thank you all for joining us here today. My purpose is to basically provide a little bit of context and provide you some insight with why we're bringing you around the table. This is a little bit of a different scenario in terms of developing a grant application. Normally, departments might talk to one another. We put information on table. We fold it up into a nice little package, and we send either in the mail or across email to a foundation our thoughts and ideas that we generate. We're taking a little bit different tact in this process, however. Our initiative is to basically begin a conversation with regards to adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. Part of this is really an education effort on behalf of the city and the community at large to educate ourselves better about what we're all doing, to share our experiences, and work collaboratively to create an application that we can all lift up and move forward. Be clear, this is not just about developing an application for the Rockefeller Foundation. This is really an opportunity that we see in terms of initiating a deeper, longer lasting, and intentional conversation with regards to how we become a more resilient city. So the purpose of today is really to kickstart that conversation, to engage your thoughts, ideas, the work that you're currently doing, and to start to harness the energy or the civic power that we have in Pittsburgh with regards to developing a thoughtful plan, but also with taking intentional action. So this is really a beginning. Like Kevin said, resilience is really an issue that is at the heart of being a Pittsburgher. We know what it means in terms to bounce back, but also how to bounce forward. What we want to do today is to really start to think in terms of how we can take advantage of opportunities, or with regards to whatever's thrown our way, how do we make Pittsburgh a stronger community? How do we make this a better place to live? How do we work collaboratively to solve common challenges and problems that we all face? So today, what we're going to do, just to lay the framework, is we're going to go around the room and provide brief introductions of who you are, the organization that you represent, and maybe why you came today. Why is this issue important to you? Then we're going to have a presentation from Dr. Kelly Klima from Carnegie Mellon University. Dr. Klima was one of the first people to approach us in the city whenever the mayor took office to initiate this conversation with regards to the importance of resilience. And she asked the question, what is Pittsburgh doing? And we've started to uncover a lot of activity that is already underway within the city, both with regards to city departments, what we're doing with our own hazard mitigation plan, how we are prepared through our public safety services, but also how we're strategically making budget and infrastructure investment decisions to mitigate the risks that we face, both from climate, but also social and economic vulnerabilities that we face. The next piece is Afton Giles, our sustainability coordinator, is going to lay out a little bit of the details with regards to the application itself. So what are the key things that we're going to need to be attuned to in developing this application? And then finally, we're going to engage into a 30 to 40 minute conversation asking several key questions to kind of tap into your knowledge and your skill sets with regards to identifying issues of vulnerability that we face as a community, to look at education opportunities that we face, to look at the issue of response and how we react to issues as we're confronted to them, and then to finally look towards a commitment. So there's a lot that's going on here. You showed up today because you have the intent and the purpose, you care about Pittsburgh, your work shows it. We appreciate your participation, and we appreciate the ability to bring you together and to start this important conversation. So with that, I'd just like to go around the room so folks get a sense of who's here, what we're starting to bring to the table, and we'll also identify opportunities and gaps that exist. Who else do we need to talk to? Who else can be a part of this conversation as we continue both to develop a dialogue around the issue of resilience, but also how do we develop our plan and actions that we take forth in the future. So with that, I'd like to turn to our first person, James Stitt, and maybe if we can just pass the microphone around. Again, the ground rules: speak clearly into the microphone, identify yourself, and we'll kick the conversation off. So James.
Hi, thanks, Grant. My name is James J. Stitt. I'm the Sustainability Manager with the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority. Certainly our interest in resiliency stems from a lot of the stormwater issues that the city faces, as well as we have some very large infrastructure issues surrounding the water and energy nexus and that sort of stuff. So I'll pass it along.
Hi, my name is Paul Welly. I'm a NSF Graduate Research Fellow at Carnegie Mellon, And I'm actually also in the water space. My research has to do with water infrastructure and water distribution.
Good morning. Brian Jensen from the Allegheny Conference on Community Development. Our interest is in reducing the amount of fragmentation among our sewer and wastewater, stormwater providers. We put together a blue ribbon panel about 3 years ago and developed a number of recommendations to reduce the amount of regionalization, reduce the amount of fragmentation and increase regionalization, and also working towards greater green infrastructure and source reduction in our systems.
Hi, my name is Samantha Balbier. I'm the Executive Director of the Greater Pittsburgh Nonprofit Partnership, which is part of the Forbes Fund. I'm here because I represent over 420 nonprofits throughout the city of Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, and also within a 10-county region. Our membership is growing very fast. We represent human services, environment, education, arts and culture, economic development, community development. We specialize in policy analysis and education and organize and advocate on behalf of the nonprofit sector. One of the things that we really want to do is to promote and support collaboration across the subsectors, and I think that this initiative really falls in line with offering opportunities for promoting that type of collaborations towards a real end that can benefit the city.
I'm Laura Mikesel. I'm Analytics and Strategy Manager for the Mayor.
Good morning. My name is Jordan Fischbach. I'm a policy researcher at the RAND Corporation. For those of you not familiar with RAND, RAND is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, objective think tank devoted to providing research and analysis to support decision making. My research in particular focuses on water resources, infrastructure planning, and climate adaptation. And I'm here in large part because I've helped lead various efforts supporting other cities and states doing their long-term adaptation planning. So most recently, work that we've done in the state of Louisiana and current work with the city of New York focused on long-term planning under uncertainty and thinking specifically about issues related to climate change.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Baxter. I'm with Pennsylvania Environmental Council, and locally we are the co-convener of the Pittsburgh Climate Initiative, and across the state we've worked with other municipalities, counties, and universities on greenhouse gas inventories and climate action plans. So we've been really involved in mitigation efforts, and I'm here today particularly with interest in how adaptation and resiliency can help drive some of the mitigation efforts that have been harder to push. I think we've gotten a lot of the early adopters who buy into climate protection on its own. So let's talk about what the threats are and how there's overlap in strategies for addressing both resiliency and mitigation.
My name is Darla Cravata. I'm with the Allegheny County Executive's Office. I'm the manager of special projects. Over the last 3 years, I've been really focused on water and sewer issues, along with a variety of other things that make Pittsburgh and our region a really important place to be. The county itself has a sustainability department that is right now looking really internally at issues within our own county. As you know, Allegheny County is a government, but yet we have between the jail, the airport, the Port Authority, the Kane hospitals, and 700 and something odd bridges. We have a lot to do within our own county in different ways. So thanks, Grant.
I'm Toni McPherson, and I'm the executive director of a nonprofit called LEAD Pittsburgh. LEAD has been concerned about the emotional health and about destigmatizing depression. And in regard to that, 5 years ago, we collaborated with colleges in the region to develop a curriculum to teach resilience skills to college students. It's called SCORE, and we've been working with colleges locally in terms of helping young people, locally and regionally, in terms of helping young people develop and strengthen their personal resilience skills. We're very interested in this topic.
Good morning. My name is Yuri Paraschuk. I'm Distinguished Service Professor at Carnegie Mellon University. Prior to that, I worked at IBM Research, where I led the Smarter Cities program, and was involved quite deeply in our work at Sendai and in Chile. So I have some understanding of problems that happen in disasters. I'm very interested in seeing what we can do to help you.
I'm Patty Schwartz. I'm the coordinator of the mental health services for Point Park University, and I've worked with Tony on the SCORE project since the beginning of the inception of it.
And I'm Lee Haller. I'm the Deputy Director with the city's Department of Public Works.
I'm LaTrenda Leonard. I am the Deputy Chief of Operations and Administration here in the office of Mayor William Peduto, and I work a lot with Public Works, so highly interested in this project. Thank you, Grant.
Thanks. Come up here.
Hi, my name is Alex Labrinidis. I'm an associate professor of computer science in the University of Pittsburgh and co-directing the Advanced Data Management Technologies Lab there. So my main interest is in big data, both in terms of a data collection and also in terms of how we can use that for community resilience and also for disaster management.
Hello, my name is Acton Giles. I'm Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Pittsburgh.
Ray DeMache, Emergency Management Homeland Security for the City of Pittsburgh. Some of the things we do in Homeland Security Emergency Management is based on charges, which is preparation, mitigation, response, and recovery. Our job is to make sure the city's able to do those four things in response to emergency events. And you can see two of them, prevention and mitigation. If we do those well, we minimize the amount of response that we have to do, and also we minimize the amount of recovery we have to do, because that's usually the longest part of it is the recovery. So our job is to pay me now versus pay me later, because as we all know, the longer you wait to pay, the more it's going to cost you. And it's just based on an old axiom, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If we can prevent it, and if we can't prevent it, then we can mitigate the impacts. We're going to be a lot better all the way along the line.
My name is Pei Zhang. I'm an associate research professor at Carnegie Mellon University. My research mainly focuses on sensing, large-scale sensing, and mobile sensing. Prior, I worked with the city of Beijing and city of Shenzhen for sensing of some environmental issues. I also work with the Department of Defense on some resilient issues for the military in the sense through the computer science studies panels.
My name is Hae-young No. I'm an assistant professor in civil engineering department at Carnegie Mellon University. I work on smart structures and infrastructure monitoring to understand how the structures behave, like buildings and bridges behave against different stressors. And I also work on seismic risk analysis to mathematically model the consequence of different disasters to the infrastructure.
Aurora Sherrard, Green Building Alliance. Through the Pittsburgh Climate Initiative, we've been engaged with these discussions about climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience for the past few years. Also at GBA, we're very focused on building performance in communities, really down to the destroying demand at the building level. Through the 2030 district, we have 36 million square feet working towards pretty substantial goals in reducing those impacts. But that's sort of at the property level. There's also the larger discussion, and right now GBA is going through strategic planning, and resilience is on the table as a question of sort of how we address this in the future.
Hi friends, my name is Andrew Butcher. I'm the CEO of G-Tech Strategies. We're a nonprofit social enterprise that works at the intersection of community development and the green economy. Fundamentally, we work with dozens of communities to help communities save energy and generate new energy, in particular by fostering community capacity to address the process of capturing a waste stream into an economic driver for community development.
Good morning, everyone. Matt Zieger, Executive in Residence with the Forbes Funds, which is an organization to build capacity in the nonprofit and foundation community in Pittsburgh. Prior to that, I was the CEO for many years of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's foundation, so keenly aware of how state policy and national policy affect these issues. Also, in work in social innovation, very much we're investing heavily in trying to build the ecosystem that really supports sustainability in these issues and really driving capital into these markets through impact investing and other ways to really ensure that these ideas become long-term realities.
Thank you. My name is Sam Taylor, and I'm the director of the Science and Engineering Ambassadors. This is a project of the National Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Engineering, but it is completely Pittsburgh-based. What we do is select a group of, right now, 26 energy researchers in Pittsburgh. We provide communication training for them in the techniques of effective science communication. And then we host a series of both public and private events whose goal is to foster dialogue and engagement around the issues of energy, specifically as they affect our region. The ultimate goal of the project is to have better informed decision-making around the community decisions that we're going to have to make around energy, and that those decisions would be more science-based than they currently are. And we also aim to create a hub to connect community resources and individuals with scientists and researchers in our region.
Great, thanks everyone. We greatly appreciate the introductions, and you get a sense of the depth and breadth of both the issue of resilience and the interest areas and the complexity that is a part of this dialogue. To help bring a little bit of focus to that, we thought that it would be a very opportune time to showcase some of the research that Dr. Kelly Klima has undertaken at the university, Carnegie Mellon University, with regards to climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience in Pittsburgh. About 6 months ago, we began a conversation with Carnegie Mellon through Dr. Klima around beginning to investigate some of these issues and what this issue means for Pittsburgh with regards to where are vulnerabilities, where do issues of mitigation and adaptation rise to the top, and how can we start to focus and develop a cogent strategy around that. So we've asked her to come today to provide you all with a little bit of context of her research to help understand and create a baseline for the conversation and to help us initiate this dialogue. So I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Klima to talk through her presentation.
Great. Do you want me to stay right here or come up there? Or? All right. So thanks, everyone. This is going to be a pretty quick data dump, and then we're going to get on into the fun part of the day where we do more of the interaction and talking and figuring out what our next steps should be. First, with climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, I find that when I've worked with DC, when I've worked with New York City, I've gone to New Jersey, helped out with Boulder, sometimes these words get a little bit confusing. So just wanted to throw out real quick, what do we mean by mitigation, adaptation, and resilience? And before we can quite get to what do they mean, first we have to ask ourselves, what is risk? Now, classically, risk is defined as this equation as hazard times exposure times vulnerability, where something like the risk is a danger posed by a variety of storms. They hit us a lot here in Pittsburgh. The hazard would be the storm itself. The exposure would be the number of people and the number of buildings and the number of infrastructures in the storm's way. And the vulnerability would be how likely those buildings, people, infrastructure, and whatnot are to break or get harmed by this particular hazard. And in a lot of ways, this is a very technical definition, but one way you can think about risk is, what is going to harm me in the future? What are some scenarios of possibilities that will cause me to be in trouble? A very famous floodplain manager, Gilbert White, used to say that floods are an act of nature, but flood losses are an act of mankind. And that's exactly why we start to ask, what are mitigation and adaptation techniques that we can take as people to prevent the flood that, in the absence of us, would not have caused any problem, but because we are exposed and because we are vulnerable, will now cause damages to people. So given that risk is hazard times exposure times vulnerability, generally speaking, risk prevention, there's a lot of different jargon we can use here, but risk prevention is something on the order of reducing the hazard in some way, shape, or form. Risk preparedness is reducing that exposure and vulnerability. Okay? So where do mitigation and adaptation fit in? Well, here's one of the points where this gets really tricky already. Climate change mitigation means reducing greenhouse gas emissions, okay? And it's one particular type of mitigation that when we say mitigation, when we've looked at what Pittsburgh has done with the Climate Action Plan and others, what other cities have done as well, usually they mean mitigation in the sense of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. Well, a second definition of mitigation is hazard mitigation, and that is very, very similar to the adaptation. Both of these things tend to focus more on the exposure and the vulnerability, and they tend to, they're basically very similar. There are ways to reduce the exposure and the vulnerability so we don't have that risk actually occur. And typically, adaptation tends to be, climate change adaptation especially, tends to be informed by what we think might happen in the future with climate change. Generally speaking, adaptation can mean adaptation to anything, so it doesn't need the climate change perspective, which is why I left it just adaptation here. Hazard mitigation tends to be informed by past events, but you guys do a great job also thinking about the future and what can go on. So in a lot of ways, these two different groups of professionals are basically doing exactly the same thing. And so finally, what is resilience? We're doing this Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities or whatever the name of it is. It's really awesome. It's really great. The first 33 cities, fantastic examples, and we're going to be one of the next 33. But before we can get there, we need to know what it means to be resilient. So I like to think of the simple definition of resilience of all of these things. It's reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. It's making sure that we're reducing our exposure and vulnerability so there's not a problem. The National Academy of Sciences, and we have our friend Sam up here in the front who works with some of those folks, they define it as the ability to prepare and plan for, absorb, recover from, or more successfully adapt to actual or potential adverse events.
They didn't take our science communication training.
So given my tendency to use flowcharts and stuff, an event hits a system and there's some sort of resilience path that's a function of time and the change in the system that hopefully gets you back to the way things were prior to the event, or better. Resilient systems include short and long term. They can run anything from land use planning, coastal stuff that's going to be 30 or 40 or 50 years in the making, to some of those comprehensive emergency management planning right after the disaster. And best practices really do advance multiple goals for resilience. We have to tie together so many different groups. And here's a chart, and I think some of these slides will be available for y'all later, but it's just showing that if you have climate change adaptation and climate mitigation, that there's some things that are both and interconnected. So I'm going to give you a quick 2 minutes on some of the things we've been doing at CMU. There's a lot of great folks in the room as well that we can chat with during the discussion from CMU, Pitt, RAND, and several others. So really quickly, I'm going to show you some of the vulnerabilities we found and then some of the recommendations. Clearly, everybody in the room knows that combined sewer overflows, flash flooding, and river floods hit everywhere in Pittsburgh and are quite a problem. This is just one map of looking at one of the watersheds. The map on the left is the altitude, or the elevation. The map on the right is the percent of impervious surface area. And so we see that, and the orange is basically, or red is more than 20% is impervious. So these two things combine to make a lot of areas really prone to a lot of flooding. We also did a lot of work on a heat vulnerability index. This is very similar to a social vulnerability index, which can help guide policy in some ways on what areas are most vulnerable to hazards. The map in the middle, the red areas are the most vulnerable. The map up on the top right is normalized by area, and the bottom right is normalized by population, depending on what policy you're looking at. And there's definitely some areas that pop out as being highly vulnerable. And this particular one was actually to heat, so we added some air conditioning and other data based on peer-reviewed literature. The population, the infrastructure, and the climate will continue to change. We hope in Pittsburgh it's going to get better. Well, not hope. We know it's going to get, growing, thriving, more population, more infrastructure. But these things are going to be taxed by not only the aging infrastructure we already have put under stress, but also future climate. And the class had a couple different policy recommendations based on this. And just to throw this out, this is an undergraduate class, and we are continuing some of the work throughout the summer. And some of the things that they said, very generally, consider large-scale permanent changes. There's tons of different things you could do there. Possibly identify additional cooling centers, and that could be useful or not, depending on some of the other things that are done. Promote some rain barrels, perhaps, and of course, these have to be used intelligently and dumped out at the right times. And really learn from other cities and our academic capital and all you great folks in the room. We have so much that we can share. There's a lot of existing funding we can really leverage. And then we can advertise these efforts a little bit better. We did a survey finding that a lot of the Pittsburgh residents weren't really aware that Pittsburgh was truthfully doing anything about the flooding or the resilience or the greenhouse gas mitigation. They were like, when you told them about the problem, they were like, yes, this is a really bad problem. We should solve it. We should do something. But the city's not doing anything. And we're like, well, wait. The city's doing a lot of great work, and here's some of these things. And as we tended to introduce these to the folks we interviewed, just randomly people off of the streets, they became much, much more positive about the city and what was going on. And we have a lot more information about any of these and also very specific detailed recommendations. And basically, what the number one thing that we think is most important is this good risk communication. There are a lot of different things that are important that we can do structurally, we can do internally. But talking with the people about what the flash floods are, where their heat vulnerabilities are, asking people about the problem, and then tailoring the communication effectively will help the best in moving forward. And so here's my contact information. Feel free to chat with me now while we're still here for the next hour. And I'm happy to give you any more of that information or published literature. And one last thing, I would be remiss again if I didn't point out all the other great academic resources you have in the room, from Jordan to Hayoung to Pei to Yuri to Alexia to Paul. You guys have a lot of great folks here, so please use us. That's why we're here. We want to help.
Thanks, Kelly. We appreciate the opportunity to provide us with a little bit of insight and some background into the issues that we are facing here in Pittsburgh. Obviously, some deep challenges that we're all very knowledgeable about, but I think providing that context and a little bit of directive with regards to where opportunities lie and the resources that we have here at the table. So what we'd like to do now, Afton Giles, the Sustainability Coordinator from the City of Pittsburgh, is going to provide us a brief introduction into the Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities application process to give us a little bit of a baseline in terms of what we're looking for to start to stoke the conversation, and then we'll begin a process of tapping into your brains with regards to some of your insights that you could share with us. So Afton.
Thank you. Good morning. The 100 Resilient Cities Challenge began in 2013, and this will be the second year that Pittsburgh has applied for the challenge. During the first year, they selected 33 cities, of which, unfortunately, we were not one of. However, this gives us the opportunity to put together a much better application going forward. So, as Kelly pointed out, what is resilience? The Rockefeller Foundation defines resilience as the ability to rebound and recover from shocks and stresses. The purpose of the 100 Resilient Cities Challenge is to identify 100 cities across the globe that are ready to rebuild and to become resilient. And mainly, the purpose of the Rockefeller Foundation grant is to be able to create a Chief Resiliency Officer position within the Mayor's office. Some of the other opportunities that they offer is to provide access to a platform of innovative public-private sector tools to help design and implement a resilient strategy, to assist in developing a resilient strategy capable of helping cities adapt to worldly shocks and stresses, and to supply funding for the hiring of the resiliency officer. Some of the eligibility criteria and requirements are that you have to be a city with a population of 50,000 residents or more. You must have your chief executive officer, which in our case is our mayor, to provide us a letter of support. And some of the requirements are to commit to developing and implementing a citywide resiliency strategy. You must agree to work with and be a part of the 100 Resilient Cities Network. And you must commit to creating or expanding the role of the Chief Resiliency Officer within the municipal government as a direct report senior level advisor within the mayor's office. The deadline for the application is September 10th, 2014.
Great. Okay, thanks, Afton. So we have our work cut out for us. We have a relatively tight timeline, but I think it's very doable given kind of the horsepower that we have here to pull together information and to access the resources that we have, not just in the room, but citywide. So what we'd like to do is to start the conversation. And we have a couple of questions that we've provided to help stoke the dialogue. And the first question that we presented to help align our content development with the application is how can we collectively identify and address our vulnerabilities? So I'd like maybe Andrew Butcher from GTEC, maybe if you could start us off with some thoughts that you have and some work that is currently underway, both with your organization and partners that you're working with.
Sure. Thank you. So I'll speak real quickly. As I mentioned, GTEC works at the intersection of community development and the green economy. In particular, we relate to resiliency in part because resiliency is in many ways a bridge, I think, between traditional climate adaptation planning and traditional community development. So I think resiliency is something we all get excited about because it's as much about social cohesion as it is about understanding physical vulnerabilities. And so recently, GTEC, on behalf of a number of partners, including Mayor's Office and Office of Sustainability, and a number of folks in the room, submitted a statement of qualifications to the Kresge Foundation, in particular to focus on a three-pronged policy process, three-pronged planning process in which we would first and foremost look to integrate some of the vulnerability techniques and data collection methods that Kelly's just spoken to us a little bit about into a traditional community planning process. And ultimately, to link that type of vulnerability assessment in community planning with a sector-based planning conversation so that each individual, that multiple sectors within the local environmental community can begin to sort of layer in a vulnerability assessment and data collection process into their lens if it's not already identified. And then thirdly, to focus on distributing capacity at a community-based level. So how do we equip and empower individuals on a neighborhood basis to be participatory in a hazard assessment and data collection process? Because there are a number of different areas in which we can look. Obviously, floodplains are readily apparent and priority for this region, but there are a number of different data sets for us to be looking at, and I think that resiliency stands to resonate within a community context if community individuals are participatory in the collection of information. That speaks to a couple points that we're pursuing with, again, a planning process sponsored through the Kresge Foundation, which ideally, I believe, will dovetail quite well with the overall nature and intention of the Rockefeller process. Grant, is that?
Thank you. Ray, maybe some thoughts that you might have with regards to hazard mitigation work underway?
Just to build a little bit on the previous comments, not only like firm maps, but landslide prone areas. You can do an analysis based on soil types. Undermined areas, we know that if those exist and there's GIS data to support where those are part of our vulnerability assessment. But probably in one aspect, the most important and most relevant, at least from my perspective, is history. If it's happened there once, it's going to happen there again. So one of the places we want to, and I know it's probably not the best term to use in this day and age, is data mine what we've done in government and where we responded to, where has public works gone for flooding, where has police, fire, and EMS responded for emergencies. If it's happened there before, it's going to happen there again. So a historical analysis of actual events will give us a good indicator as to what our vulnerabilities are. And even to an extent, I'll give you a good example. We had flooding in 1996. And one of the things we did retrospectively is we sent a survey out to all the buildings downtown and said, when did you first notice flooding in your building? Give us the date and time. So they replied back to the survey, and then we took that date and time and we laid it up against the pool flood readings the National Weather Service had for the pool in Pittsburgh at the point. So now we know if it crests at 32 feet, we have a full list of buildings that more than likely will have water in their basement and have some negative impact. Hopefully we can make that better by doing certain mitigation things, and that can be a measure of our effectiveness on how well we can mitigate something, is if we change the parameters of that previous event. So it tells us what's going to happen because it's happened before already, and to a degree it gives us a standard to work for to try to make it better.
Back to Yuri.
Thanks. I was thinking about something about this Rockefeller opportunity. If you look at the 31 cities that have already been granted funds, most of them have to do with infrastructure. Now, the thing about Pittsburgh that's unique is its emergence from this economic problem that it had. And it's also an example of other cities around the country, the sort of Rust Belt kind of cities. So how can we build this, not just the infrastructure, but the socio-economic impact, the socio-economic resilience, which includes infrastructure. For example, we've got people living in economically distressed areas that are subjected to some of these problems. But how do we connect not just this problem, infrastructure, but this social economic issue, which hasn't been really tackled by, by Rockefeller. And I think it's a great hook for Pittsburgh.
So combining both infrastructure, but also the social component. So really thinking about people, right?
Sorry, I'm going to answer this. Yes, but also think about another thing. If you look at where investment is made in startups, this is kind of the extreme end of things, right? Where are the VCs? How many VCs are there in Pittsburgh?
Venture capital.
Venture capitalists, right. How can we bring kind of all the way from improving the social economic situation to, take advantage of the intellectual power in the city to build out everything from that end to the top end of venture investment? And building startups. Pittsburgh's not known for being a place where there's a lot of startups that emerge.
Aurora Sherrard?
I just want to echo what Yuri said about a hook, because we really need one. The Rockefeller Foundation put up a blog post a few weeks ago about 4 things that make these proposals successful, and 3 of them we have no problem, right? We have an innovative and engaged chief executive. We have all the stakeholders at the table, and we have a desire to want to collaborate with other cities. Those are sort of done deals. What we don't have is number 2. A recent catalyst for change. We don't have a Hurricane Katrina or a Hurricane Sandy. We don't have wildfires. We're like, compared to other international cities competing for these funds, we don't have a natural disaster, essentially, and that's a good thing. So I think we need to build on what we do have and weave that thread and that story, and that's what will make us successful.
We go to Lindsay, then Sam.
Sure. Well, I think in response to that, not at the level of some of the hurricanes that we've seen, but we can go back to incidents of flooding, that have had catastrophic incidences, response to snow events, responses to the cold temperatures, extremely cold temperatures this winter. I think we can make the case that we're already seeing it without the catastrophe. And just one of the things I wanted to add to the conversation that I don't think we've touched on yet, we've talked a lot about infrastructure in terms of flooding, roads, things like that, but also the power grid and how vulnerable this region may or may not be to heat waves, extremely cold temperatures, not only price fluctuations, but also reliability and service, and how that could be a driver for things that we're already starting to put in place, like combined heat and power, microgrids, renewable energy, distributed energy. And I would argue that at some point it might be appropriate to bring Duquesne Light to the table to see what's already on their radar, how receptive they are to working on issues of grid vulnerability.
Great idea. Can we pass the mic to Sam, please, and then to Brian?
Thank you. Wow, there's so many things to follow up on. First, just building on Yuri's comments about the importance of the social and community aspects of this, I would add that, in addition to infrastructure and physical things, the need to focus on on communication about these activities, and the need for those to be actually, evidence-based. Kelly presented in some of her slides the fact that many people do not understand the fundamental definitions of some of these risk factors, and that when interviewing people on the streets, they didn't know about mitigation activities that were going on. So incorporating a communication strategy into our plan, I think, would be critical. To build on the comment about not having a hook, that Pittsburgh hasn't had some catastrophe that we're responding to, we are, in fact, perfectly positioned for an impending catastrophe if it could go in that direction, and that is energy development in our region. So you hear a lot about Pittsburgh becoming the energy capital of North America, and how we are going to actually exploit the resources that we have, not only including Marcellus shale, natural gas, but also the nuclear industry, which is largely based in Pittsburgh, many developing solar industries in Pittsburgh, and we have the ability right now to actually create a plan for Pittsburgh that takes this in a direction that we want to go in. Do we want to immediately enter into another cycle of boom and bust as we did with coal, or do we want to actually plan for a resilient and sustainable Pittsburgh to utilize these resources more wisely?
We'll go to Brian Jensen here, and then to Samantha.
Okay. Thanks, Grant. I wanted to just comment on both a hook and an event. I think related are an event, which is really in very recent years, was Hurricane Ivan. Hurricane Ivan created tremendous flooding throughout our region. But what we found was that through cooperation between Allegheny County, the city of Pittsburgh, various other municipalities, perhaps for the first time, at least in my professional career here, looking at regionalization and trying to get communities to cooperate, we really saw a tremendous amount of outpouring of public goodwill and public service between municipalities. I think that is a very good hook for us to work into. If we're going to talk about flash flooding, the boundaries of Pittsburgh's watershed don't stop at Penn Hills or at Bellevue or wherever else we're talking about in the region. So we really need to be thinking about those surrounding municipalities around Pittsburgh. And I think a really good hook would be for us to be thinking about the cooperation of let's say, the Connect communities or the Alcosan communities. And I think, again, we can look at Hurricane Ivan as an example of how we are building on that capacity and this history of beginning to work together.
So in response to the hook, while there hasn't been a catastrophic event in Pittsburgh, we do have an issue that directly correlates to energy that is of utmost importance, and that's air quality. And Pittsburgh is known nationally as having one of the worst air quality issues, and it has severe impact on health. And so where that's woven in, I think, is really critical and important. That puts us in a very negative light nationally. And, I would argue that maybe we need some additional stakeholders at this conversation to see where the connection is between energy and outdoor air quality, but then also what's the economic impact of the poor air quality, and in terms of healthcare, because healthcare is another economic driver in our city, and we have one of the highest incidents of pediatric asthma. And so I don't think that there's a catastrophic event, but there's a chronic issue within the city that really does need to be dealt with, and it relates directly to types of energy we use in the region.
We're going to go to Alexandros next, please, right in front of you. But let me just kind of put that out there. I mean, is there an inherent conflict that we can address through this versus, which is the acute event, which the grant requires attention to, versus, Samantha, and I think what everyone else is alluding to, is chronic issues? which might be kind of the, the slower burn that is a bigger problem that we face. Is something to give consideration to. So Alexandros, then Ray.
So Alex Labrinidis, University of Pittsburgh. So I would like to say one thing about the hooks, and then I don't think we have the major catastrophe, and this is good. But all of the things I heard are chronic issues that have the potential of being a catastrophe unless, as Ray said earlier, we don't act on it early on. And all of them could go badly. The air quality could go back to what it was in the 70s. Flooding can be worse. And a word that we heard for the first time last year, which was polar vortex, could be kind of a more frequent everyday occurrence. I do think we could point that we need a multitude of things, and that's why there is a role to play to have someone coordinating all these efforts and have the support from the foundation. One other aspect I want to follow up on what Sam said about communication. I think one other idea about communication is to also improve real-time communication of the efforts currently happening during a disaster. So something simple, when we get the snow and we know the plow is going to come at some point, it's much better for the people to know that all the plows are right there right now. This is where they are. This is what they're trying to do, and they're going to get to someone's house as soon as possible, rather than someone just giving a statistic that we have, we believe them, but it's a whole different thing to say, okay, so they're like 2 blocks away, they're going to be here in a minute. This part of information transparency that is not happening, like this is the plan, and this is what we're undertaking, what we're doing, which is very crucial, because if they don't know that there's a plan, it's going to be worse. But also to the point that, and this is what's happening right now, and possibly this is how you can help by staying off the street in the next half hour, for example, because that's where we're going to be plowing. So there are some things that would require a different type of infrastructure, which is information technology infrastructure, to be extended to cover those.
To Jordan, to Ray, and then to Matt.
All right, thanks. So I wanted to sort of echo and expand on a couple of points. Thinking about this hook overall, one idea I wanted to expand on is the idea that this also represents an opportunity. That yes, many of the cities that were funded before, the domestic cities, had a sort of major disaster event. But one thing I think that Rockefeller is very interested in is how do you get the momentum going? How do you make this a major issue? How do you put it at the top of the list without the disaster? And I think we can put together a compelling vision of why there's a number of different vulnerabilities that could lead to something. But I think it also presents an opportunity to make that pitch, to pull those threads together and to do it in a way that you don't have to rely on the thing that just happened a couple of years ago or this most recent event. And so I think we're really primed to do that, and there's a lot of opportunity here to tell that story. The second point I wanted to make actually builds on what Brian was saying to some extent, which is I think another component of a successful application is going to be a compelling vision for the role of the Chief Resilience Officer. And they talk about 4 different ways that it could be fit into the city governance structure. But I think given what Brian was mentioning regarding the broader municipal context, the institutional challenges that we face in terms of planning at the watershed scale in particular, also provides an opportunity to tell the story of how a chief resilience officer in the city can help to enable that engagement with the broader communities in the county, and really think about that as a synthetic vision moving forward. So I'm hoping that as we discuss further, we can also think about potential roles for that chief resilience officer and how that process might play out.
Great. Ray, then Matt.
Just to touch one more moment on the hook item. We have a little saying in the emergency management business: never waste a good disaster. I mean, unfortunately, we as human beings react to bad things. As much as we say it's going to happen, it can happen. We don't do anything until after it happens. So I think whatever we choose to do as we move forward, we should have in our mind to be resilient and light enough on our feet so that if we are provided with a misadventure where something does occur, we can shift our focus and use that event to maximize our potential with the foundation. That being said, I think also we have enough hazards there that we can look at, and I always think of the pet rock. Some guy came up with an idea of putting a rock in a box, and he made a lot of money selling it. So at the end of the day, we take whatever we have, and if we market it well, I mean, this is human nature. If we package it well, we can sell it. So I think that's two ways to look at it. We obviously don't make things up, but we have to sell ourselves, and we have to sell the project and whatever that is. And one other thing I'll mention, as far as intergovernmental cooperation, and Ivan was mentioned, we had an organization that's been in place since 1998, predating September 11th, which is come to know as the Region 13 Regional Counterterrorism Task Force. It's now the Region 13 Task Force. It's 13 counties in the city of Pittsburgh that we have an intergovernmental cooperation agreement with, and we meet monthly, we work together, and probably I'll give you a good example of this intergovernmental cooperation. In Hurricane Ivan, we had some people, we had the U.S. Coast Guard actually went out and they got into some trouble and we had to help them out. And who we sent to help them out was the Swiftwater Rescue Team from the city of Johnstown. So they came all the way here and they were responding to events in Crafton and the western part of the city in Allegheny County. So we do have that in place already. We do exercise it to an extent, and we have those contacts within those local governments, I bet from an emergency response planning perspective, but that's an opportunity where we could, use those contacts to branch out and maybe get some other of our fellow governments involved in whatever we do down the line.
So when I think about resiliency, I think about a lot of these communities have approached this as a very static problem, so infrastructure-based kind of static solution to a static problem. And I think as a hook, I think resiliency very much needs to be a living animal. It needs to kind of continuously grow. So the things that need to be there in order for that to happen is we need to think of this as a human system. So the social capital component is incredibly important as a foundational part of it. We also need to think about capital flows in the community. So how is private capital, how is public capital continuing this work so that it's not a static grant from a single foundation? And we have a very, very unique place in that as with one of the largest philanthropic communities in the world right here in our backyard. And really, they are also very much exploring program-related investments and social impact bonding and very non-traditional ways of applying capital into these solutions that are ongoing and sustainable. So I think we have an interesting part there. And the third thing to ongoing sustainability is innovation. And I think we, again, have a very, very much a hook with look at the academic brain power that's in the room. The innovation that's being driven out of these universities in automation, low-cost sensor technologies, in water, and in energy infrastructure are really at the intersection of all of resilient infrastructure for the rest of the world. So we are both an innovation driver to the rest of the world. We have this existing history of coming back through social capital, through really bootstrapping ourselves as a city to come back to be as strong as we are today from these great challenges we've faced. And we also have this capital flow in our backyard that's desiring to move into this space that we might be able to harness to this. So I think thinking of this as a moving target, as something that needs to live, will give us a real leg up on this process.
Let's go to Andrew, then to Paige, just logistically.
Great points, Matt. Grant, I'm just trying to also think about your questions and focusing the conversation a little bit in that it would be helpful. I know it was mentioned that the city submitted an application last year, and I'm wondering if there are lessons learned or if there was feedback that was provided, especially around the question around the linkage to recent events. And I also wonder, Ray, you bring up great points around the existing intergovernmental coordination, and I'm wondering, especially as it pertains to the first question here, identifying and addressing vulnerabilities, I would imagine there's already, as you mentioned, a pretty significant data set along those lines, and I'm just wondering, at some point, if we could have a conversation around how the process for submitting the grant for the September 10th deadline will take shape, because one could imagine there would be a really wonderful research committee associated with starting the process of mining some of that existing data set. Because whether we identify a hook or whether we aggregate issues of social, economic, and environmental vulnerability, seems like there's already a fair amount of information out there, and it's just a matter of how we focus it and by when we need to focus it. So with all that, I guess I'm wondering at some point if we could talk about any lessons learned or feedback from last year's submission.
To respond to your question, a lot of the feedback that we received from Rockefeller actually goes back to the lack of a hook, because we didn't have that major catastrophe. In last year's application, we focused on a lot of some of our smaller systematic problems, and we also focused on our ability to overcome as a city a lot of our economic issues that we have had in the past. So I think this conversation right now is actually very valuable for us to figure out a better way of packaging this information so that we can present a stronger application going forward. So we can package all of our smaller issues into the possibility of of what could become a major catastrophe for Pittsburgh. So I think that that would be better demonstrated going forward. And the other part that was really focused on was actually the position in itself as to how we create a resiliency officer within the city of Pittsburgh and how they're going to work with the outer community in order to create this resiliency plan, how they're going to sit, where they're going to be focused on, what their tasks will be. So going forward, actually focusing on the position as a resiliency officer itself is also going to be a huge thing for us.
Pei, and then to Darla, and then to Kelly, and we'll work around.
So I guess I'll continue on the idea of the hook here. So I, half the time, preface what I'm saying, half the time I'm living in California. So from an outsider perspective, when I think about Pittsburgh, I apologize, you may have to edit the video later. I actually I don't think about innovation, despite the fact I'm in CMU. I don't really think about air pollution. I think of Beijing when I think of air pollution. I don't think of Snowmageddon because I see New York and the power outages, all those. So the hook seemed to have been taken over by those things. And and I live in the city in Mountain View. They have the blessing of the wildfires, the droughts, and the earthquakes. Very sexy hooks. A lot of blessings there. But one thing that when Yuri mentioned that the social economic factors, I do live in the ghetto Mountain View where the houses are only $1 million each. And in those situations, to address these issues, it's a very different way of addressing it. Right? And I work with cities in China and the US military, very authoritarian places. They can just throw money at these problems. And when Yuri mentioned the social economic problems, when I think of Pittsburgh, I actually think, oh, it's probably like Detroit. And it's really my bias. I'm sorry again to the video. My bias is it's a poor and desolate place I don't want to be. I'm sorry. But that could be our hook, I think, because addressing these almost common issues through I don't want to use the word poor, but over and over again, but through a very social, economic, conscious approach, that's actually something I find that could be unique to Pittsburgh.
Interesting. Can we go to Darla, and then to Kelly?
So I've been listening, and I just have several comments. First of all, I think I think Aurora hit the nail on the head with trying to find this hook, and I also, after listening, I think the chronic issues really are a nice way to start to frame our problems. Because although we had Ivan, we've had flooding over the years, we've had a lot of issues, we have chronic issues around air quality, water, stormwater, and water quality. And we also have chronic public health issues. Our Director of Public Health, Karen Hacker, has been sending out more information and focused more on some chronic issues around school-age kids and adult populations inside of Pittsburgh. So I think trying to frame that chronic can go from bad to worse really quickly would be a really nice hook. The other thing that I actually think is really interesting is I loved hearing what, and I'm sorry I forgot your name already, because I'm in the Pei, what he's looking at from an outsider's point of view. So I'm going to say from an insider's point of view, Pittsburgh is becoming more unaffordable to live in for a certain group of people. So as we've been, and I don't want to say this, and as we've been resilient in our effort to maintain and grow, the one thing that we're growing towards is almost a small, unaffordable donut. And that kind of that kind of worries me, because as I watch over the, I've been very blessed to be able to see some things from a larger picture, and I'm watching housing costs and prices to even rent something in our city becoming more and more unaffordable, and I'm watching people get actually pushed out to the outer ring. So I think that hook is really the chronic issues, because I mean, I don't wish for any major catastrophe at all to be able to become a resilient city, but I wish for us to solve the chronic issues that we've never been able to collaboratively attack.
If we go to Kelly, James, Paul, and so we'll just.
So there's been a lot of really great comments and thoughts in the room, and I'd just like to echo a few to reiterate from my perspective. I think that this is beyond just Rockefeller. I mean, we might get shot for saying that later when Rockefeller views this video, but we are planning something here that is going to be around for years and years. And Rockefeller would be a fantastic step in the right direction and really helpful. But we have, as you pointed out, a lot of great capital in Pittsburgh. We have a lot of the energy stuff, Sam, you pointed out. And we have the ability to continue to revitalize. And this is an opportunity, regardless of what happens with this, to continue to move forward. And because of that, the way that I think about it is a little bit broader. I know that it's important for this grant to have a hook, but I love Jordan's comment about this. The big question that FEMA, that everybody else wants to know, is how do we convince people to become resilient when there wasn't a window of opportunity of a natural hazard? How do you get people to do this? And we are, right now, we're like the frogs in the pot on the stove, right? We have all these chronic problems that are continuing to inch up little by little as the temperature increases little bit by little bit. But us frogs, we're not jumping out of that pot yet. But, you know, if we had a boiling pot of water that is a hurricane or an earthquake or a volcano or something, the frog's going to jump right out, right? So we are poised in a spot where we have the chronic problems. We have the opportunities, and there will be economic possibilities moving forward to make the city more resilient in a positive way that benefit a lot of folks. But the real question that I see in the long term for Pittsburgh is, how do we convince folks to become resilient in this area where we're not seeing, as Pei pointed out, the air quality of Beijing or the volcano that's going to blow up in Iceland shortly or something like that?
Maybe to James, and we can start to think about that in terms of communicating about some of these issues.
Yeah, and just to echo what Kelly had said there, yeah, I was thinking exactly the same thing, the frog in the pot of water. You know, it's like this slow burn where we don't have the big sexy disaster, right, to tie our funding to, right, and for the cameras to come and be attracted to. But what we do have is what I think most of the other cities in the world have, is this slow burn, this issue of ongoing and sort of this, you know, problems that, you know, we deal with them day to day to day to day, and we don't necessarily always have a solution at hand. And I think maybe, you know, the whole reason Rockefeller is doing this is to set these cities up as examples for other cities. So maybe our hook is that our plan is not a plan that we trot out when the TV cameras and satellite trucks come, but it's a plan for long-term sustainability to address these chronic issues so that we're not that frog in the pot of water, and that we can get people to react before the water gets too hot. So, you know, communicating it in that respect, that this is an example plan for the majority of cities out there, because the majority of cities out there, I think, you know, especially in the Midwest and cities like us, don't have these great big disasters to deal with. So maybe that's where we go with it.
It's actually quite funny. I raised my hand a little bit ago, but then I was set up really well by Kelly and as we were going forward. So I want to take a crack at the role for the Chief Resilience Officer. I wanted to be the first one to try to do that. I think that it would be really interesting as we're defining the hook as something that is chronic, to talk about it as maybe a peacetime role. and that, you know, the resilience officer isn't somebody who's there on the front lines when the emergency management is happening, but it's somebody who's set up in the background a really good system and a really good community, so that when the acute event does happen, if it happens, there's a really nice organic response. And so what I wanted to bring up was, I think an interesting role for the Chief Resilience Officer could be one of constant communication. I think too often when we have serious issues, we try a little bit too late to reach out to the public and explain everything at the same time. But if you had a big forum, a big get-together of, like we're doing right now, between people and nonprofits, but also people from the communities, where people could get together, maybe be selected by a random lot, have a nice conversation, and have this happen quite frequently, and then these to be published. I think that would be a really interesting thing to pull together the community, because we've got these chronic issues, we've got economic issues, we've got air quality issues, we've got flooding, health, water. And we don't have all the answers. We've said that, you know, maybe there isn't so much venture capital here in Pittsburgh. But I actually applied to and was accepted to an incubator here in Pittsburgh. So it exists. We just don't have all of the answers when we get together with 20 people, as distinguished as this group is. So I wanted to throw those ideas out about the Chief Resilience Officer, maybe think about the peacetime role and see what other people had to say.
Great. We go to Samantha, please, then to Yuri.
So I'm glad people picked up on chronic. That was good. But thanks. But I have one more question about the definition of risk. And you talked about exposure, but what I would argue that in the city of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, there are communities that are much more vulnerable than others. And so those people who have higher risk factors, that needs to be part of the equation. And we need to think about how do we identify the chronic issues that are facing the most vulnerable communities, and then how do you engage the organizations and providers who are working with those communities. So that needs to be brought into the equation so that we kind of approach this as tailored and not a one-size-fits-all type of approach for the city.
Well, first of all, I've heard some really, really good ideas, and I'm going to tell you we're going to use some of them in the proposals we're making to other agencies. But one of the things in working with cities that we found is that cities are siloed, but they're a system of systems. So if we could put together a number, let's say we take green, let's say we take some of these chronic issues, let's say we take an economic issue, let's put together that map that links them together. And from that map, show how Pittsburgh, because of the foundations that are here, because of, as Ray says, the intergovernmental relationships that exist, that probably don't exist in many other areas. How are we going to take the whole system of Pittsburgh and the county and improve its status, whether in air quality, water management, economic development? How do we put that idea together as a system? And I can tell you, nobody in any of these other proposals has done that. You know, and Kelly made a great point, right? This is not just about this proposal, but this proposal is the catalyst for us to go forward. Thanks.
Go to Aurora.
I just like to talk after Yuri. He just cues me up for good things. So I think we all know the challenges. We've rattled through them here, right? Bridges, air quality, water quality, CSOs, flooding, just keeps coming up. But I think where we're going is in scoping this CRO position, where it should sit, what it should do, is we need to think about what our opportunities are, why we are the every city, why social capital and socioeconomic issues are, sort of perfectly poised here for us to grasp and demonstrate for others. And I think, we all know what those things are, but if once we, in building this concept, this proposal, that is where we need to be. We have a very engaged, long history in the building sector, right? We know that's an opportunity. We have all the right people at the table, and we know who else needs to come to the table. I think if we just bring those things out, we've got a really, really strong story that we can sort of get to. And I'm liking this, like how we focus on sort of the people with the higher risk, higher exposure. I think that's something that we can do that a lot of other cities aren't able to.
how does this opportunity to develop a resilience strategy, I mean, to that point, how does it or how can a strategy make Pittsburgh a stronger place?
Actually, perfect. I was going to build on that. I think one critical way is through distributed capacity, right? And a lot of us look at distributed capacity through the lens of physical infrastructure and energy systems, of which I also mean. But I think through distributed capacity, in particular, and it touches upon the communication thread, and it touches upon the social equity and inclusion thread, in that I think resiliency makes Pittsburgh stronger by distributing the capacity in distressed communities to be both participatory in information collection and process, because communities already know where their vulnerabilities are. They may not think about it through the technical way in which many of us do, but they already, in a large part, know where not to be in storms. Interesting enough, I think that there are many good examples of low-income communities that are more resilient in the face of natural disaster and catastrophe. And so I think in some ways it's cultivating a learning process from those communities such that, frankly, we as a working group or those of us in the sector are learning from that process as much as possible. And I think that also enables ownership. And so I think the more there's widespread ownership, and it's more than just a communication strategy, of which is important, but it's widespread ownership of people of the process. And I think that there are a number of good existing systems within the community development system and within the academic system to be able to take advantage of.
Right. To Jordan, and then
Well, I just want to build on that a little bit. And I think there are a lot of potential advantages to this idea of a resilience plan. And one of them, again, based on a lot of what I'm hearing, I think there's general agreement in the room of what we think the vulnerabilities are and what we think the goals should be. But I think one thing that the Chief Resilience Officer can do in this plan can help is with a goals and a visioning exercise that really brings all of this together. I mean, a sort of a ranking of vulnerability and then thinking about, well, where do we want to be? What is the ultimate goal? And then that starts to set the stage, at least, for where investment dollars should flow and what the priorities should be in terms of doing that. And right now, I feel like because we are very distributed and we have lots of good distributed resources, that's not necessarily brought together, and there aren't necessarily processes in place to allow that goal setting to happen, pulling together all these disparate threads. So this is a chance and an opportunity and a person, a position to allow that process to play out in terms of strategic planning.
We go to Tony.
As I'm listening to all these great ideas, I have one additional comment, and it may be part of the hook. And that is, I mean, in regard to other cities in the world, Pittsburgh's really a pretty okay place. And the threats are not really all that bad. But one of the challenges we do have is in regard to, and it's challenges and opportunities, and it's bringing together the youth culture that's finally beginning to come here and stay as a result of their coming to the educational institutions. Those educational institutions are also challenged as they deal with the impact of technology and how they're going to continue into the future. And then on the other side of it, within the city, and more so in the city than in the region, is the challenge faced by a huge aging population and the resources that they need in terms of healthcare. And how do we bring those very divergent groups of people together to work in a collaborative way?
Bridging the boomers and the millennials?
Well, the millennials, also the people from foreign countries that are coming here, you know, for educational and work opportunities. If you're in Oakland and on the university campuses, it's a very divergent group of cultures. If you're in other parts of the city, it's not. And yet, all of these people have great resources that they can bring to the strength of the community. How do we bring them together and help them all individually and collaboratively be more resilient?
Maybe the UPMC Highmark split is our catastrophe.
Do you want to record that?
No, I didn't. That's why I said it. You're without recording.
Any other thoughts on that? James?
Just briefly, that we're talking about this resiliency strategy and how it can make Pittsburgh a stronger community. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that I think we already have, as has been kind of alluded to, is we have a lot of this resiliency strategy in place. It's just not sort of couched under one position, one person, one office. So maybe for this application, presenting all of that together, and certainly it's a heavy lift by September 10th to get it all there, but maybe a start to show that. And the other thing is that, and evidence of that, I think, that we have these resiliency strategies in place and that they're working really well is some of Kelly's research, in that, she's talking to the person on the street who's like, they don't even realize that the city's doing these things. Well, because, Ray and his team and the other folks out there are doing them so very well, that the people don't realize it, that those things are striking, that there are problems with flash flooding or landslides or other issues around that we're facing, but they get taken care of very well and effectively because we have great crews and great teams out there. So we don't want to lose sight and make sure we key in on that as these things are being done.
We go to Alexandros, then to Ray.
So just a quick point to about the being frogs in the pot of boiling water is that I think what we've done in the past, what the city has done in the past, is reacting very well to disasters when they were in isolation. So when we had only one flood, let's say, or we had only bad weather, like lots of snow, we did fairly well. When we're looking at these events increasing, then what would happen also is that the probability of them happening together will materialize. So that would mean that unless you have some resilience built ahead of time, and as James said, with a person coordinating all of this, making sure that even if things happen at the same time, things will still function, we're going to be in trouble. And that's not only responding to it, but also the financial aspect, right? So we ran out of salt this year because we didn't plan for that much snow to come. And luckily, we only had snow. There was no other major catastrophes in the wintertime. But we can imagine one day being really warm and having a lot of flooding at the same time, and a lot of energy companies moving in, and the air pollution, being higher, and then it becomes a bigger problem from multiple aspects at the same time.
Maybe to Ray, and part of the thing we want to start to think about now is how can your organization help? What could the folks in this room do? Both in terms of building the content for the application, but then also this is a beginning of a conversation, I think, in terms of a longer term strategy that we're looking to develop to harness what's already out there, what is in place, but communicating it, and then creating opportunities to future convenings.
One item that may help us, and I have copies of most of them, if not all of them, from southwestern PA. Every government, every county, large cities are required by FEMA to write a document called a hazard vulnerability analysis. And then they're also required, if they want money to try to mitigate that, they have to have a hazard mitigation plan, which tries to identify chronic, acute problems and how you're going to fix them. One example of a hazard mitigation project that I did that was quite successful a number of years back is we identified some folks on a street called Ansonia Place. We bought all their houses, and we tore them down, and we put it back to where it should be, which is just a natural retention pond. That's what it was. We put houses there, but it was a natural retention pond. So there is that baseline documents out there that we could look at to help us develop some ideas or thoughts, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel in that respect. So I have most of them, if not all of them. Where are we going?
Just a quick thought on the structure of where this individual might sit, or this office. I think that this entity needs to be have continuity, and I think it needs to have a breadth of kind of cross-sector interaction that might be best done through a public-private partnership or some quasi-private entity that is in direct and strong affiliation with the mayor's office in the city, so that it can have speed to market and kind of continuity, and maybe be able to pull more capital in a way that just a public office might not be able to handle.
building on that a little bit, it's more of a question probably for you, Grant, Afton, James, and Ray, and Darla, because in some ways what I'm hearing is the need for this office to serve in somewhat of a coordinating entity between both climate action planning, Homeland Security, Emergency Services, Community Development and Human Services, private sector coordination, and of course Public Works and Infrastructure. So those are a couple meatballs to juggle. But in some ways, that's probably quite similar to some of the roles that many of you already play. And I guess I'm just how does that overlap with existing intergovernmental efforts, or how is that different?
I think it's a good place to kind of maybe leave the conversation today. And we're giving up against our time frame here. But I think it creates a good place for us to continue the conversation. Because what we've found here today, just to kind of bring some things together, is the need for a hook to bring together a variety of conversations and data that is already out there, things that are currently underway, whether it's with regards to water or air quality or other chronic issues that we face. But I think also the opportunity to coordinate between governments, between the private sector, between the nonprofit sector, and between issue areas. So definitely I want to thank you guys all for coming here today and starting this dialogue. What we'll do in the near future is both pull together this content, create a brief summary document of what you've brought and offered to the table today, and start, maybe to Andrew, your point, line up some responsibilities. So who can address some of the specific questions and assign you with tasks and roles, so that we can pull together both the application, but I think a more enduring activity. One of the things that Andrew mentioned, we are in the process right now at the City of Pittsburgh in terms of developing the next generation of our climate action plan. So looking through our partners at the Pittsburgh Climate Initiative to bring together what we see as kind of the next generation opportunity, what we're calling tentatively right now Climate Action Plan 3.0. We'll work on the title for something much more marketable. But effectively, taking the work that has been done and looking to add this component to the conversation. So thinking in terms of some of those acute issues, as well as systemic cooperation. I think we have new partners here at the table today that we've identified, which is really exciting, and we look forward to pulling this conversation together on into the future. So I want to thank you guys for coming here today, and we look forward to working with you. So thank you.